Imagine falling into the ocean and just continuing downward endlessly. At first, it doesn't feel frightening at all. Warm sunlight filters through the water. Everything glows blue. Fish drift quietly around you. The surface still feels close enough to reach. It almost feels peaceful. But then, you keep sinking. And slowly, something begins to change. The deeper you descend, the less this place feels like Earth. The sunlight weakens. The water grows colder. The pressure begins building around your body with unimaginable force, squeezing from every direction at once. At certain depths, even military submarines would collapse instantly like crushed soda cans. And deeper still, the ocean becomes so hostile that biology itself starts breaking apart. Fish lose dense bones. Creatures turn transparent. Some animals survive only by becoming almost entirely water, soft enough for the pressure to pass directly through them. And hidden inside the darkest trenches of the Pacific Ocean, there are living organisms that have never once seen sunlight in the entire history of their species. Not for days. Not for thousands of years. Never. This isn't just the deep ocean anymore. It's an entirely different world buried beneath our planet. A hidden environment operating under rules humans were never designed to survive. And the deeper we descend into it, the more disturbing it becomes. Most people picture the ocean as something familiar. Beaches during summer vacations. Waves rolling onto the shore. Coral reefs filled with color. Maybe an endless stretch of blue water disappearing into the horizon. But that version of the ocean is only the surface. Just the thin outer skin of the planet. The truth is that Earth's oceans are unimaginably deep. If all the water on Earth suddenly vanished, you would uncover enormous mountain ranges larger than the Alps. Trenches deeper than Mount Everest is tall. And vast alien landscapes stretching across the planet in complete darkness. Entire regions no human eye has ever seen. In fact, scientists estimate humanity has explored more of the moon than our own seafloor. And the deeper we travel into the ocean, the stranger reality starts to feel. The ocean is divided into layers. But these layers do not simply feel like deeper water. Each one feels like entering a completely different world. The first layer is called the epipelagic zone. The sunlight zone. This is the ocean humans understand. Bright sunlight pours through the water. The temperature is warm. Coral reefs burst with life and color. Tuna move in schools. Sharks patrol the open water. Whales migrate through enormous blue distances. Nearly all marine life exists here because sunlight can still penetrate the surface. Plants and microscopic plankton absorb that light and turn it into energy through photosynthesis. This single process supports almost the entire marine food chain on Earth. In many ways, this upper layer is what makes the ocean feel alive to us. But sunlight has limits. And below roughly 200 meters, the familiar world above begins disappearing. Slowly. Quietly. Almost like the ocean itself is swallowing the last traces of Earth. Most people grow up thinking the ocean is peaceful. Blue water. Warm beaches. Gentle waves hitting the shore at night. But the deeper humanity explored, the more we realized something unsettling. There is an entire hidden world beneath us that almost feels forbidden. A place so extreme, so isolated, that it barely resembles the planet we live on above. And honestly, we've only seen a tiny fraction of it. So before we descend any deeper into the abyss, I want to ask you something. If you honestly think you're brave enough to stay for this entire journey into the deep ocean, comment 1. But if the ocean has already started making you uncomfortable, comment 0. As you descend farther beneath the surface, the sunlight slowly begins to disappear. Not all at once. Gradually. Like the world above is fading away behind you. Welcome to the Twilight Zone. A massive region stretching from around 200 meters, down to nearly 1,000 meters below the surface. At these depths, the ocean becomes cold, dark, and deeply unsettling. The colors begin vanishing one by one. Red disappears first, then orange, then yellow, until eventually, almost everything becomes blue, and then nearly black. It feels less like swimming underwater, and more like drifting through empty space. Meanwhile, the pressure rises rapidly. By the time you reach 1,000 meters deep, the pressure surrounding your body is already more than 100 times greater than what humans experience at sea level. Enough force to instantly crush most surface creatures. So life adapts. But the adaptations down here begin looking strange, even disturbing. Some creatures evolve enormous eyes capable of detecting the faintest traces of light in the darkness. Others become nearly invisible, completely transparent. And many species begin creating their own light. A phenomenon known as bioluminescence. Down here, light is survival. Lanternfish glow from beneath their bodies to hide themselves from predators lurking below. Anglerfish dangle glowing lures in front of their mouths, patiently waiting for prey to swim directly toward death. Certain squid flash patterns through the darkness to communicate with one another across the black water. In the upper ocean, light represents beauty. Down here, it becomes something else entirely. Deception. Camouflage. Hunting. War. And yet, this still isn't the true deep sea. Because below 1,000 meters, sunlight disappears forever. At around 1,000 meters beneath the surface, you enter the midnight zone. Permanent darkness. No sunrise. No sunset. No moonlight reflecting through the waves. Nothing. The only light remaining comes from the creatures themselves. And this is where life begins feeling truly alien. The pressure down here is almost impossible to comprehend. Roughly 1,500 pounds pressing against every square inch of your body. Imagine balancing the weight of an elephant on the tip of your finger, while that same crushing force presses against every inch of your skin simultaneously. Humans were never meant to survive here. Honestly, many deep-sea animals weren't either. Even giant squid, creatures people imagine living at the absolute bottom of the ocean, usually never descend beyond around 3,000 meters. Blobfish survive because their bodies are mostly gelatin. Rigid bones become dangerous. Air pockets become fatal. Swim bladders collapse violently under the pressure. At these depths, the ocean punishes anything stiff or fragile. So evolution begins favoring completely different traits. Soft flesh. Flexible skeletons. Bodies that almost behave like liquid. The creatures surviving here stop resisting the pressure, and instead become part of it. And perhaps no animal represents this better than the snailfish. The deepest fish ever recorded on Earth. At first glance, it honestly looks weak. Small. Pale pink. Almost transparent. Barely resembling what most people would even call a fish. But biologically, this creature is almost perfect for its environment. Its body is made largely from gelatinous water-based tissue. Its bones are heavily reduced. Parts of its skull remain partially open. Because in the deepest ocean, strength itself becomes a weakness. The trench crushes anything rigid. So the snailfish survives by doing something almost impossible to imagine. It becomes soft enough for the pressure to pass directly through its body without destroying it. In the deepest parts of Earth's oceans, evolution does not reward dominance. It rewards surrender. The deeper the ocean becomes, the stranger life starts behaving. Bones become dangerous. Eyes slowly stop mattering. Entire creatures survive by transforming themselves into living gelatin. And maybe that's what makes the deep sea feel so disturbing. Not because it's filled with giant monsters, but because life down here feels almost unnatural. Like evolution abandoned everything familiar and started over from scratch. So let me ask you honestly. Are you still comfortable descending deeper? If you're still watching this without feeling uneasy, comment 1. But if the ocean is genuinely starting to make you uncomfortable now, comment 0. At around 4,000 meters beneath the surface, you finally reach the abyss. An endless seafloor stretching across nearly half the planet. No sunlight. No color. Almost no movement. Just freezing water. Thick layers of mud. And silence so complete it barely feels real. For most of Earth, this is the true bottom of the ocean. A gigantic wasteland built from millions of years of death slowly falling from above. Because eventually, everything sinks. Dead fish. Dead plankton. Fragments of shells. Waste drifting through the water. Tiny particles of skin and organic matter. All of it slowly descends through the darkness like underwater snowfall. Scientists call this marine snow. And despite the beautiful name, it is essentially a constant rain of decay. But for creatures living in the abyss, this disgusting snowfall becomes the foundation of life itself. Food is so rare down here that survival becomes painfully slow. Some deep-sea animals barely move at all. Every movement burns energy. Every mistake matters. Certain species may drift for days, sometimes weeks, waiting for a single opportunity to eat. And then, something enormous arrives. A whale dies near the surface. Its body begins sinking slowly through miles of black water. Hour after hour. Day after day. Until eventually, it reaches the seafloor. And the moment it touches the abyss, the entire deep ocean comes alive. This is known as a whale fall. One of the most important events in the deep sea. First come the scavengers. Sleeper sharks. Hagfish twisting through the flesh. Massive swarms of amphipods stripping away soft tissue. Then arrive worms, bacteria, and entire ecosystems feeding from what remains. A single whale carcass can support life for decades. In the deep ocean, death becomes an oasis. A city forms around a corpse. And honestly, there's something deeply unsettling about that. Entire communities surviving in complete darkness, feeding on the remains of a world they will never see. But even the abyss is not the deepest place on Earth. Because far below this frozen wasteland, the ocean descends one final time. Into something far stranger. A place where the seafloor itself begins breaking apart. Below 6,000 meters, you enter the Hadal Zone. Named after Hades, the ruler of the underworld in Greek mythology. And honestly, there may be no better name for it. This is trench territory. The Mariana Trench. The deepest known location on Earth. Nearly 11,000 meters beneath the surface. Deeper than Mount Everest is tall. The pressure down here exceeds 1,100 atmospheres. Enough force to crush a normal submarine into twisted metal almost instantly. At these depths, the ocean no longer feels like water. It feels solid. A crushing invisible weight pressing against everything that exists. And yet somehow, life still survives here. Barely. The creatures living in the Hadal Zone no longer resemble normal animals. They look more like biological experiments. The snailfish drifts silently through the trench like a pale ghost. Blind amphipods swarm across the mud in enormous numbers, scavenging anything that reaches the bottom. And spread across the seafloor are some of the strangest organisms ever discovered on Earth. Xenophyophores. At first glance, they almost resemble coral. Or giant sea sponges. But they are neither. Each xenophyophore is actually one single gigantic living cell. Not a colony. Not a collection of organisms. One cell. Some grow larger than grapefruits. Which sounds impossible until you realize the deep sea constantly breaks the rules of biology. Even stranger. These massive cells absorb toxic heavy metals directly from the environment. Mercury. Lead. Even uranium. Then they use surrounding sediment to build bizarre structures across the trench floor. In a world where almost nothing survives, these giant toxic organisms become ecosystem builders. Tiny creatures hide inside them. Microorganisms feed around them. Life clusters around anything capable of creating structure in the emptiness. But the Mariana Trench is not only biologically extreme. It is geologically alive. The trench exists because one tectonic plate is literally being dragged beneath another. The Pacific plate is slowly sinking into Earth's mantle. The seafloor is grinding against itself beneath miles of water and darkness. Earthquakes constantly reshape the trench walls. Mud volcanoes erupt chemicals into the abyss. Entire sections of the ocean floor slowly collapse and reform over time. The deepest place on Earth is not peaceful. It is active, violent, still forming, and hidden around these toxic volcanic vents. Scientists discovered something that changed how humanity understands life itself. Because down here, life exists without sunlight. Near hydrothermal vents, the seafloor leaks chemicals directly into the ocean. Methane, hydrogen sulfide, superheated mineral-rich fluids erupting from cracks in Earth's crust. To most forms of life, these chemicals are deadly. But in the deep ocean, certain organisms evolve to use them. Microbes gather around these vents in enormous colonies. Instead of relying on sunlight, they survive through a completely different process. Chemosynthesis. Rather than harvesting energy from the sun, they extract energy directly from chemical reactions inside the Earth itself. In other words, they are feeding on the planet. And when scientists fully understood this, it changed everything. Because for most of human history, we believed sunlight was necessary for life. That every ecosystem on Earth ultimately depended on the sun. But the deep ocean proved that assumption wrong. Life can survive in freezing darkness, under unimaginable pressure, surrounded by toxic chemicals, completely isolated from sunlight forever. And honestly, that realization terrified scientists. Because if life can survive here, then where else could it survive? Suddenly, the deep sea stopped feeling like an isolated corner of Earth, and started feeling like a blueprint for alien worlds. This is one reason NASA became so interested in the Mariana Trench and deep ocean exploration. Moons like Europa and Enceladus likely contain vast oceans hidden beneath layers of ice. Dark oceans, cold oceans, high-pressure oceans. Places that may resemble Earth's deepest trenches more than Earth's surface itself. Scientists now believe that if extraterrestrial life exists somewhere in our solar system, it may look less like intelligent creatures flying through space, and more like the strange microbial ecosystems hidden around deep sea vents. Which means the Mariana Trench is no longer just one of the least explored places on Earth. It may be the closest thing humanity has ever found to another world. But despite how isolated this environment feels, humanity has already reached it. And unfortunately, we brought part of ourselves down there too. In 1960, two men willingly descended into the deepest place on Earth. Jacques Picard, Don Walsh. At the time, humanity had not even landed on the moon yet. Computers were primitive. Deep ocean science barely existed. And almost nobody truly understood what waited nearly 11,000 meters beneath the Pacific Ocean. But they went anyway. Inside a strange machine called the Trieste. It didn't look futuristic. It didn't look elegant. Honestly, it looked more like a giant metal accident. A massive gasoline-filled float attached to a tiny steel sphere barely large enough for two men to squeeze inside shoulder to shoulder. No comfort. No room to move. Just steel walls. Darkness. And unimaginable pressure waiting below them. Then the descent began. Slowly. The sunlight disappeared above them. Blue faded into black. The ocean outside the tiny window became completely empty. No fish. No light. No sense of direction. Just endless darkness pressing against the hull from every side. Hour after hour. They continued sinking deeper into a place no human being had ever seen before. And the deeper they went, the more terrifying every sound became. The metal hull groaned constantly beneath the pressure. Small creaks echoed through the cabin. Every noise carried the same terrifying thought. What happens if the ocean finally wins? Because down here, failure is instant. No rescue mission. No escape. No second chances. At nearly 11,000 meters deep, it happened. A sudden crack exploded through the cabin. Violent. Sharp. Unmistakable. One of the outer plexiglass windows had fractured under the pressure. Imagine sitting inside a steel sphere miles beneath the surface. Hearing a sound that tells you the ocean is actively trying to break through the only thing keeping you alive. Outside that window, the pressure was so extreme it could crush a military submarine like a soda can. If the hull failed completely, the water would not slowly leak inside. It would hit them with such force that death would arrive before their brains could even process what happened. And somehow, the Trieste survived. The two men finally reached the bottom of Challenger Deep, the deepest known point on Earth. When they touched down, the seafloor erupted into clouds of fine sediment that had likely remained undisturbed for thousands of years. For a few brief moments, humanity sat at the very bottom of the world. Then they left. And honestly, for decades afterward, very few people ever returned. Because the trench was simply too hostile. Too expensive. Too dangerous. But eventually, technology caught up. Robotic landers and deep-sea drones began descending into the abyss once again. Scientists hoped to study creatures that had evolved in complete isolation from the surface world. And what they discovered was deeply disturbing. Microplastics. Tiny fragments of human garbage. Inside the stomachs of deep-sea amphipods living nearly 11,000 meters below the ocean surface. Think about how insane that is for a second. There are places on Earth where humans have never stood. Places no sunlight has ever touched. Places so deep they can crush steel. And somehow, our trash still made it there. Plastic fibers from clothing. Fragments of bottles. Industrial waste. Chemical pollution. All slowly drifting downward through the ocean for years. Until finally settling at the bottom of the trench. The Mariana Trench acts like a giant funnel. Anything sinking through the Pacific eventually gets pulled downward into the deepest parts of the Earth's oceans. And once something reaches the trench, it rarely leaves. The creatures living there don't understand pollution. They don't know what plastic is. They simply eat whatever falls from above. For millions of years. Marine snow fed the abyss. Now humanity is part of that snowfall too. And maybe that's the most unsettling realization of all. We barely understand the deep ocean. We've explored only a tiny fraction of it. Yet before fully discovering this hidden world, we already contaminated it. Maybe the scariest thing about the Mariana Trench isn't the darkness. It isn't the pressure. It isn't even the creatures surviving down there. It's the fact that humanity reached the deepest place on Earth, and still has almost no idea what truly exists below us. We explored less than 10% of the ocean. And somehow, our pollution already reached the bottom first. That should honestly disturb everyone watching this. So now I want to ask you something. After everything we've seen so far, would you still descend into the trench if given the chance? If your curiosity is stronger than your fear, comment 1. But if this place feels like something humans were never meant to enter, comment 0. The Mariana Trench is not filled with giant sea monsters waiting in the dark. The truth is stranger than that. Because the deepest place on Earth is not terrifying due to one creature. It's terrifying because the entire environment feels fundamentally incompatible with human existence. A world where pressure crushes biology itself. Where sunlight has never existed. Where life survives by abandoning almost everything we normally associate with being alive. Bones become dangerous. Strength becomes weakness. Softness becomes survival. Entire ecosystems survive on dead materials slowly drifting down from a world they will never see. And despite all our technology, humanity still knows almost nothing about these depths. Most of the trench remains unexplored, unmapped, unseen. There are regions of our own planet more mysterious to us than the surface of the moon. And maybe that's what truly unsettles people about the deep ocean. Not giant monsters. Not ancient sharks. Not even the darkness itself. But the realization that beneath our feet, there is still an entire hidden world operating under rules humans were never designed to survive. A place that existed long before us. And one that will continue existing long after we're gone.